Ever pondered what made the 1950s so iconic in American history? This decade was the dawn of a new era, a period of transformation that left an indelible mark on the nation's identity. The 1950s were ushered in on the heels of World War II, a global conflict that had stretched on for 6 long years. The war had taken a toll on the world, but it also brought about the end of old power structures, paving the way for America to emerge as a global superpower. This was a time when the nation was flexing its muscles on the world stage, not just in terms of military might, but also in economic prowess. The Cold War had its infancy in this decade, a geopolitical chess match between the United States and the Soviet Union. This rivalry would shape international politics for the next 40 years, casting a long, chilly shadow over global affairs. It was an era of espionage, nuclear dread, and the struggle for ideological supremacy. Meanwhile, on the home front, something remarkable was happening. The end of the war had brought back millions of servicemen and women, and they were eager to start families. This led to a significant population surge, giving birth to the baby boomer generation. The suburbs started to grow rapidly as families sought a piece of the American dream. The economy was booming. Jobs were plentiful, wages were on the rise, and consumer goods were becoming more accessible than ever before. The middle class was expanding, and with it, the promise of a better life. It was a time of optimism, a time when the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. Yet, beneath the surface, the seeds of change were being sown. Social, political, and cultural shifts were underway, and they would come to define the decades that followed. The 1950s marked the start of a new era, a time of prosperity and change, setting the stage for the dramatic events to come. Join us as we journey back in time to explore this fascinating decade in American history. What if I told you that the 1950s was the birthplace of many of the things we now associate with American culture? That's right, folks. The 1950s was a time of rapid change and innovation, a time that saw a pop culture explosion that still echoes today. It's hard to imagine a world without rock and roll, isn't it? Well, the 1950s was when it all began. The rhythm and blues of African American music met the country and western of white America to create a rebellious, foot-tapping sound that swept the nation. Suddenly, everyone was all shook up, and the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, was born. But the 1950s wasn't just about the music. It was also the golden age of television. Families would gather around their sets to watch shows like I Love Lucy, one of the first sitcoms to feature a female lead. This groundbreaking show not only entertained, but also pushed the boundaries of what was considered appropriate for television, setting the stage for the sitcoms we enjoy today. And then, there was the rise of teen culture. The 1950s saw the emergence of the teenager as a distinct social group, with their own tastes, fashions, and attitudes. This was symbolized by figures like James Dean, the brooding star of Rebel Without a Cause. Dean's tragic early death only added to his mystique, making him an enduring symbol of youthful rebellion. The 1950s was also a time of economic prosperity. The post-war boom led to a consumer culture, with people buying TVs, cars, and all sorts of newfangled gadgets. This was the era of the American dream, a time when it seemed that anyone could make it big. So, the 1950s wasn't just about poodle skirts and milkshakes. It was a decade that saw the birth of rock and roll, the rise of television, the emergence of teen culture, and the blossoming of the American dream. And thus, the 1950s became the decade that shaped American popular culture as we know it today. Can you imagine a world without credit cards or fast food? That was America before the 1950s. The 1950s was indeed a period of groundbreaking innovations, a time where the landscape of everyday American life was dramatically altered. One of the most significant innovations of this decade was the introduction of the credit card. In the year 1950, a novel concept emerged on the financial scene called Diners Club. This was the first credit card, a revolution in the way transactions were conducted. No longer did people need to carry around hefty amounts of cash. Instead, they had a small plastic card that allowed them to make purchases on credit. This was a game changer, leading to the rise of consumerism that has since shaped our modern economic landscape. If the credit card changed the way we shopped, the birth of fast food redefined the way we ate. In 1955, a man named Ray Kroc purchased a small burger joint named McDonald's and transformed it into the first fast food chain. This signaled the start of a fast food revolution, with convenience and speed becoming the new norm for dining. But the 1950s wasn't just about financial and culinary innovations. This period also saw remarkable strides in the realm of science. The year 1953 marked the discovery of the DNA double helix structure by scientists James Watson and Francis Crick. This discovery revolutionized the field of biology, paving the way for significant advancements in genetics and medicine. The 1950s was a time of rapid progress and change. From the way we spend, to the way we eat, to our understanding of the very fabric of life, this decade left an indelible mark on America and the world. It was a time when the boundaries of possibility were pushed and new horizons were explored. With these innovations, the 1950s proved to be a decade of remarkable scientific and technological advancements. Did you know that the fight for civil rights gained significant momentum in the 1950s? Our journey through the 1950s now brings us to a pivotal point in American history: the fight for civil rights. This decade was marked by significant events that reshaped the social landscape of the nation, propelling it towards a more equitable future. One of the most significant milestones was the landmark case of Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. This was a watershed moment in the history of American civil rights. The case challenged the very fabric of the American education system, questioning the notion of separate but equal. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional, effectively dismantling the legal framework of racial segregation. Another major event was the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 and 56. This was a 13-month mass protest against the policy of racial segregation on the public transit system of Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott brought to the forefront a young, charismatic leader named Martin Luther King Jr., who would later become an iconic figure in the fight for civil rights. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance inspired millions and played a crucial role in the movement. King's leadership, along with the collective strength and resilience of those who participated in the boycott, eventually led to a Supreme Court ruling that declared segregation on public buses unconstitutional. This victory was a testament to the power of peaceful protest and the indomitable spirit of those who fought against injustice. The 1950s also saw the emergence of other influential figures like Rosa Parks, whose defiance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, and Thurgood Marshall, who argued the Brown v. Board of Education case in the Supreme Court. These important events marked the beginning of a long, hard fight for equality that would continue into the following decades. The 1950s set the stage for the civil rights movement, a testament to the power of ordinary people to effect extraordinary change. It was a decade that forever changed the course of American history, a decade that taught us that the fight for justice and equality is a fight worth fighting. These important events mark the beginning of a long, hard fight for equality that would continue into the following decades. As we near the end of our journey, let's reflect on the lasting impact of the 1950s. This decade was a pivotal point in American history, playing a key role in shaping the country's culture, technology, and social landscape. The 1950s, often referred to as the Golden Age, were a time of prosperity and growth, a period when America truly began to find its footing in the post-war world. In terms of culture, the 1950s were an explosion of new ideas and expressions. The birth of rock and roll, the rise of television, and the popularity of Hollywood stars like Marilyn Monroe and James Dean all contributed to a vibrant and dynamic cultural scene. This was a decade that embraced fun and youthful exuberance, forever changing the way we perceive entertainment. Technologically, the 1950s were a time of groundbreaking innovations. The introduction of the credit card, the mass production of televisions, and the dawn of the space age all took place during this decade. These technological advancements not only transformed everyday life, but also laid the foundation for future innovations. The 1950s were also marked by significant social changes. The fight for civil rights gained momentum, with landmark events like the Montgomery bus boycott and the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. These movements challenged the status quo and sparked a wave of social and political change that continues to resonate today. But the 1950s were not just about progress and change. They were also a time of tension and conflict, as the Cold War and the Red Scare cast long shadows over the decade. These events served as a reminder that even in times of prosperity and growth, challenges and struggles are never far behind. As we look back, it's clear that the 1950s were more than just a decade. They were a turning point, a time of change and growth that helped shape the America we know today. So, the next time you hear a rock and roll song or swipe your credit card, remember the Roaring '50s, a decade that truly shaped America.